Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. It looks like Legacy really do need an EV credit to have any chance of even making a profit in the industry. But what would happen if we left it all to the free market and didn't subsidise EVs? How would the industry play out then? We'll focus just on the domestic US auto market mainly and see what we can work out there. There's so much to think about here. It may be a little bit scattered at first, but I think overall it should be fairly axiomatic. Firstly, there is no guarantee that these tax credits will even come into fruition, and even if they do, we don't know for how long they'll last. I'm guessing that everyone is massively underestimating just how many vehicles Tesla can make in the US alone. The Cash for Clunkers program was just over 10 years ago, and that only cost $3 billion. Even with just 1 million EV sales a year, this program would cost $7.5 billion every year. Except we expect it to eventually be about 10 times that, especially within the next 10 years. So it's simply too expensive. Actually, I'm often asked, why would Tesla sandbag their production? Well, there are many reasons, but what if one of them was for the tax credits? What if Giga Texas is going to actually hit a 2 million a year run rate by 2024, and suddenly there alone is an additional $15 billion a year in tax credits that the government had never considered, and we aren't even including Fremont? I think they would have to end the incentive fairly quickly, especially if Legacy are complaining about Tesla getting the vast majority of all their efforts that they invested in cronyism. Firstly, let's have a look at what's happening to the demand. More and more consumers are turning to electric. We're seeing a lot of reports saying a massive amount of consumers will at least consider electric as their next vehicle. Of course, it's still a new technology and consumers are still dubious about it. To this day, I still hear people worried about their batteries needing to be replaced and costing $20,000 or something. But Tesla's batteries come with an 8-year warranty, or 120,000 miles. I mean, there are a lot of ICE cars that never even make it to 100,000 miles. Tesla believe in their batteries, and this is for their 2170 cells. As for the 4680, well, perhaps they'll increase the warranty for them to add even more confidence for consumers. Anyway, the main point is consumers are coming around to electric, and in a big way. If 50% of consumers are considering electric for their next purchase, then that's about 8 million each year. Tesla will be approaching a 1 million a year run rate in the US sometime early next year. Who is going to serve the remaining 7 million customers that want electric? Perhaps US Legacy combined could manage about 250,000 at a push. What we have is a massive deficit in supply, and as I like to bring up often, we haven't even seen Tesla's latest product in all its glory, the 4680 Model Y, which will only further increase demand. Alright, now auto demand is somewhat of a zero-sum game. If someone buys a Tesla, then it likely means they didn't buy a Toyota or BMW. What is happening to ICE demand? It is diminishing, obviously. Now we've discussed economies of scale at length and seen how much Tesla benefits when they're able to increase their production levels. Well, the same applies for Legacy, except that they don't aim for massive profits. They aim for minimal profits, or around break even, in order to pump out as many cars as possible, get as many bums in seats as they can. Why? Because there are so many moving parts in an internal combustion engine that there is plenty to go wrong. And that's how Legacy make their money, by repairing engines and selling new parts. A terrible business model for the consumer. Anyway, as their demand dwindles, then it won't take long before they lose said economies of scale. Thus, they have to downsize, close factories, layoffs, and end various model lines that are simply not profitable, thus leaving fewer models available, the ones that are more profitable and likely more expensive. Then, as there is less supply, in effect, the prices will have to increase further. Of course, this will make it harder to cover OPEX, so prices have to rise even more. It's a vicious circle that we saw coming a mile away. The end result in the auto industry will be high-priced ICE vehicles for people who really do need a new car and are actually willing to pay these now excessive prices. Of course, demand for ICE is dropping even more, especially now the actual ICE prices are rising so much higher. It's the end of an industry, but it will take its time to go down. Meanwhile, a lot of consumers still want new cars, but they aren't interested in expensive ICE cars. That will likely lose a fortune eventually as well. Instead, they're now looking at electric. Now, I know we all think everyone would just want Teslas, but we know there is a massive discrepancy between supply and demand, especially in this future scenario too. So either a Tesla is too expensive by this stage, or the waiting list is too long. Therefore, consumers move on to other electric cars, i.e. Legacy's EVs. But it's going to take until past about 2025 until Legacy can collectively produce 1 million EVs a year just in the US. Therefore, these electric cars will also be in minimal supply and thus will have high prices too. If prices of ICE vehicles are too high, then demand drops, obviously, of new cars, but it will increase for used. Used ICE cars could appreciate as people are holding on to them for longer periods of time, as they have to wait a couple of years until they get to their place in the queue for a new electric car. But in the meantime, everyone is holding on to their ICE vehicles, but ICE vehicles are not reliable. They break down and parts wear out, almost magically by design, as soon as the warranty expires. But hang on, Legacy have now cut their costs massively with all this downsizing, and now their most profitable part of the business, their part business, is flourishing. But they would have made massive downsizes, and I can't see the UAW being too happy about that, which might also mean the government might not be too incentivized to help the auto industry. Do they need help though? What about all that debt they have? Well, the debt is collateralized by owners' cars that are making the car payments. If their ICE cars have appreciated, then they're likely to continue to make the payments. So legacy debt may not be an issue, but they will need to sell cars in the future, which they need government support for. Wow, can you only imagine how painful this was for everyone involved trying to put together this bill and trying to find a fix or a way for Legacy to remain solvent against Tesla? It's not easy. Of course, once the bandwidth for the supply chains for electric cars reaches the same level as demand, then all ICE cars will have little value. But we're talking perhaps 20 million EVs a year just in the US, possibly even more if demand for EVs outweighs regular auto demand, as people just want the latest technology and better living standards. But we're not going to hit 20 million new EVs sold in the US this decade. There's actually a serious deficit here. There are not going to be enough autos that are made at a low enough cost for enough consumers. EVs are taking too long to ramp up, and ICE no longer has enough demand to reach mass economies of scale. A used ICE car's engine can only break down so many times until they're no longer feasible to fix anymore. Eventually, there'll be fewer cars on the road, as more will be coming off than going on. However, what if Tesla's robotaxis were the necessary solution? We estimate one robotaxi could replace 5 vehicles, but if we were desperate, it could probably push closer to 10. And on top of that, if people are really desperate, then they can carpool. The US is highly dependent on ample autos. A lot of the country has been designed around autos. Suburbs with no sidewalks, drive-thrus, malls, and minimal public rail. Some people think this was actually by design from the influence the auto industry had on the country. I hate to say it, but the other option may just be hybrids. But this would come down to the consumer's preference. Eventually, most new car buyers would be aware that fully electric is the future. But if the waiting list is too long, then perhaps a plug-in hybrid is the solution for them, if it's still affordable. I'm not saying this is the future I want, I'm just trying to be realistic here and run through how this might play out. But if you can buy a Toyota hybrid for about $30,000, then perhaps that is a realistic solution for some people in the meantime. There are lots of other great electric alternatives these days to commute too, like e-bikes and scooters, which are so much cheaper than running cars. If cars end up becoming that much more expensive, then a lot of people can adapt, as many live in urban areas. In fact, cities should encourage more electric transport like this, and many actually are. The thing is, an EV credit will definitely take demand from ICE, as ICE suddenly becomes $7,500 more expensive. It makes no sense. It really does sound like potentially this credit is for Legacy to make massive profits from hybrids, whilst also having a product that is in demand. Legacy could just raise the prices of their hybrids and then spend a fortune on advertising, telling all customers that they have $7,500 off now. Going through this, it would appear that the ICE industry is in big trouble. I assume that the likes of GM or Ford realize that their EV supply is not going to be anything substantial for a really long time, and nothing remotely close to Tesla. Therefore, I would say that they're going to pivot into hybrids from ICE. There should at least be more demand for hybrids than there is ICE, except hybrids do cost more, hence why they need a credit. I also think this looks like another huge opportunity for the likes of Toyota, who actually did bet on a hybrid future. Of course, they just have to assemble the vehicles in the US. I think when you include Tesla's credits and hybrids, then the cost of the incentive becomes ridiculous. It won't last long anyway. I mean, GM is only about $50 billion market cap. In other words, if 6.7 million EVs were sold with credits, that would have cost the taxpayers the entire valuation of the General Motors company, and obviously tens of millions will be sold. This likely needs a lot more thought, so let me know in the comments how you think this could go too. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.